Through the Noise with your host, Ernesto Glucksmann.
Hey, Elliot, thank you for joining me on the show on Through the Noise, where the reality is this show helps me understand the world a little bit better through experts' eyes like yours. And Elliot Haspel, thanks for coming by. You are an education policy expert and the author of a book called Crawling Behind America's Childcare Crisis and How to Fix It. Did I get the title right?
You did, and thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Obviously, I have a couple of little ones, and I've been learning about, just by having them, what the childcare situation options are for us or have been. And I can, just to kind of start us off, and then maybe you can give us a sense of where things are off.
Mm-hmm.
But all I can say is my wife and I are pretty lucky that, we both work, we both have to work. We are lucky that we have work, that we have jobs. And it's a lot of money that we end up spending on these early childcare years for our kids, because without putting them in a daycare, or in the early stage, we had a nanny share.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we couldn't even afford to give, for the Washington DC area, the full salary of somebody, livable salary. And so we had to share with another family. So they brought their kid, we had our kid, we both paid a significant sum that kind of got her, this lady, up to it. But you just kind of quickly come to realization that that's like a limited window for her. And we had to help her find the next gig and the next thing. And then when we got into the daycare, the daycares are around, they're very expensive. And we're lucky we have one that we think is wonderful, that works really well. But I feel the struggle, like we feel it. We feel the stress. We feel like if, something were to happen to my business or my wife's job, we would be in some real trouble to figure out what to do about childcare. And we're not even it's like, I don't know how single parents do it. I don't know how low income parents do it. Like, there's no way. It's like, it's so hard for us, and we're the lucky ones. Like that, it's something's off. And then I forgot, I should have looked this up, but I had another education, I forgot her name. It's one of the episodes, but she had mentioned that half of childcare providers qualify for public assistance.
Yes, that's right.
Which shocked me at that point, because that's it's a substantial amount that the parents have to come up with. But even so, more than half can't get, of these people that are taking care at these most important, years, these fast development years. So I know, first, from just witnessing this and sort of living through it, there's a problem. It's not a good one. What are your thoughts? Like, where do you feel? Clearly your book covers it in great detail, but what's your sort of overall take of the issues here?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think your experience is unfortunately extremely common. And part of why I started writing the book was because, I experienced this myself with my daughters, my peers were experiencing it. And I had the very same sort of reaction you did of, if middle-class families, who are well-educated and have privilege and, all incredibly lucky, are struggling this much, then what does that mean for everyone who is not in that situation? And, so the pain point is sort of penetrated deeply into the middle class, and honestly, even the upper middle class. That certainly implies the situation for those who aren't as lucky. And so, all of what you're seeing is really a consequence of the fact that America doesn't actually have a childcare system. We have what advocates sort of lovingly call a childcare non-system. Never been in public investment at the level needed to create a publicly backed childcare system the way that we have a publicly backed public education system. And so, right, because the interesting thing is, like, when your kids and my kids get to the age of 5 or 6 and they go to kindergarten, something magical happens, right? They're good to go for free. All of a sudden, they were no longer paying for it, and it's this really bizarre thing where from ages sort of 0 to 5, basically, or 0 to 4, it's on the parents to come up with the care, and then from 5 or 6 to age 17 or 18, the society takes over. Despite the fact that if you think about every reason that we have a public education system, it's critical for children's development. It's critical so parents can work. There is a childcare component to public schools, even though we don't talk about it very often. And because we know that ultimately, like, the next generation of citizens and workers has to come out of the public schools. Well, what we know now is all of those things are true, really starting at birth or shortly thereafter, right? We've got, at this point in American society, pre-pandemic, 2/3 of kids age 6 or under had all of their available parents in the workforce. So that means they require some kind of outside care, right? And we also know from a brain development standpoint that children are making foundational learning connections, socio-emotional connections, behavioral connections starting at birth. So babies are making upwards of 1 million neural connections every second. So it's not babies are not just sort of the sack of potatoes and then learning magically happens when they turn 5. Like, it turns out that if you want your kid to be able to read, actually what's going on when they're an infant is really important. So the reason this is so important is because, and we're seeing this now with the pandemic, has laid this bare, is we've created a very fragile system. Because you're right, like, parents are paying a lot, but the fact is childcare is expensive, and it should be expensive because you need primarily very low adult to child ratios. So I taught 4th grade in a public school, and I could have 25, 30, at one point I had 32 or 33 4th graders in my class. And I'm not saying that's a good thing to have, like, a class that's that
I'm like
big,
raising
right?
my eyebrows. I think about that, like, that
Yeah,
it's intense, right?
right.
But
But
it's
like,
doable,
it's
or it's
doable.
whatever. Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Exactly. I could do that illegally and be like, I could manage it, And so if you think about, like, one teacher to 25 kids, well, in a childcare setting, you need one teacher for every 4 or 6 kids, and they're talking about toddlers. And so you think about that's 5 times as expensive, and that drives the economics of it. So even though you're paying $10,000-$20,000 as a parent, the fact of the true cost of care, if you wanted to pay educators, a good wage, if you wanted to make sure that these programs were really solid and sustainable, it's actually probably up closer, in the DC area, it's probably closer to $35,000-$40,000 per kid. But because we put in such a small amount of public money, it's up to the parents to come up with it. Programs don't have any other choice but to cut their educator wages and educator benefits down to the bone, which is where you get that 50% number. So this is all sort of the downstream result of policy choices that we've made as a society to not publicly fund childcare, and now we have this system that works for basically no one.
Man, there's so much in there to even like unpack, but it just seems to me like it doesn't make sense because, like, the first couple of years, I mean, hey, I've said this on the show. My son, for the first year, he would wake up 5 times a night. It would take 20 minutes to get him to rock him down and get him to calm down. And let me just tell you, having to wake up every day 5 times a night, try that for a week or try that for 2 days and see how you perform. Like, I had like fog that I had to ask clients, you might have to repeat things twice, because it was just brutal, tough, just dealing with that child. And then on top of that, if we couldn't afford a nanny that could be there to help us during the day, I don't know how, one of us would have to stop working. Right. But then you kind of set yourself up with, like, okay, one income stream now. That's even, you're just getting more and more at risk in a sense. And you're probably, I mean, I looked at your book and I skimmed through it. There's differences in the quality of care you can get, right, between every. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the differences with formal, informal, and maybe parental?
So So, care can be delivered in a lot of different settings, and all of them have the potential to be high quality. And by quality, on the most basic level, we're talking about sort of a warm, intentional interaction between a caregiver and a child, one where the caregiver is present, paying attention. They're having what the sort of neuroscientists call serve and return interactions, where, the child is pointing at something or babbling about something, and instead of being distracted, the adult's actually like, oh, yes, that's a dog, or, let's read a book together, like if you're pointing at that kind of stuff. And ideally you have a caregiver who also knows enough basics of child development to basically be able to stretch their thinking a little bit, so they understand that like a 1-year-old might whack a book closed. It doesn't mean they don't want to read the book. It means that they're like just tactfully exploring exactly what happens if I whack this thing closed. So when we say quality, I mean there's more to it than that, but the most basic level, that's what we're talking about. And the different kinds of care kind of range, in informality. So the most informal care is either with a parent or with, kind of a relative or a neighbor, right? So grandma's watching the kids during the day, your cousin is, your neighbor is. The sort of next line is what we call family child care, or sometimes known in-home child care. So, there's someone who's having some number of children who's not related to them come into their home, and they're providing the care there. And then you go all the way up to childcare centers that might be out of a church or a Jewish community center. It might be a standalone center. There's a great one up there in Northern Virginia called ACA. And then you have your sort of Head Start and public school pre-K, like those things. And I should say, for those who are listening, I always use childcare just to broadly mean between the ages birth to 5. It's encompassing of what you might consider preschool or pre-K. All of that gets wrapped into what's considered childcare, early care, and education. The terminology is wonky. But the fact is, like, higher quality care costs more money, right? If you want to have an educator who's not, worried about putting food on their table, and therefore probably isn't going to be super present. Like, if you want someone who has at least an associate's degree in your early childhood development, like those things cost more money. So while you can find sort of like a quote unquote cut rate program, like it's certainly like there's a relationship between how much you can pay and the quality of care that you're getting. And that's, definitely a piece of this.
Yeah, we went to we did one daycare where we liked it and it was convenient. But what we noticed quickly is some of the teachers weren't staying very long, and we just knew, oh, that's an indicator of a leadership or just not being paid well, whatever factors. And I just thought that's going to have like that down the line impact of attention on the children. And lo and behold, we just bit the bullet and went to a little bit more expensive one where we heard some of the teachers were going, and they had a lot tighter ship. They definitely had opportunities to move up. There was a lot of extending training. They just have a lot more, I don't want the word is maybe corporatized experience, whatever that means. But at the end of the day, the teachers just seem to be more in tuned with each of the kids. And everything that I've read on childhood development, that's what you have to do as a parent or caregiver or whatever. And so if you're stressed because you're barely making your bill because you're getting public assistance,
right?
That's just not going to come through in attention to when a child suddenly needs something, right? I don't know. There's something there. And I would assume that it goes down to parents. Like, right now, I guess a good example is we got all a great lesson and learned of just how hard childcare providers work, right? In April when everything shut down and we had to pull kids from daycares or whatever, you just kind of realize, wow, that is super intense experience to have them here, to think you can even try to educate them and hold down a job. I mean, we did our best, but it didn't really work for us at all, and we're like, I keep reminding myself, I should be grateful because we have resources. Like what like, I can't understand the below part. And can you talk a little bit about this? Like, in one of your New York Times, you had a New York Times article when there's like a schism was the word they used between what care means and education. And like, What is going on there? Because I don't quite understand that one. What's up
Yeah.
with that?
So, for a long time, this goes back to a history of gender sort of misogyny and kind of sexism that kind of put care into a pretty devalued place. Right? Care as women's work. That used to be the way it was seen. It's still in many places seen that way. Today, it's seen as unskilled. It's seen as, just this sort of there's this natural maternal instinct, right? And then women are just built to be caregivers, and therefore, we don't need to worry or honor that at all, which is a bunch of malarkey, to borrow from Vice President Biden. And then, but basically, what we know now. And this sort of started in the last part of the 20th century, and then it really came to the fore in the year 2000 with this report called Neurons to Neighborhoods that was put out by the National Academy of Sciences. And basically what it says is that children's brain development is inextricable from the care that they're getting. Like, children are not, it is way less about teaching the ABCs and way more about having those serve and return interactions, having a child understand that their needs will be met, having a child understand how to communicate their needs. Like, those things actually build the part of the brain that are connected to things like executive functioning, which is focused on concentration, memory, the ability to persevere when you encounter a challenge. All of those things actually turn out to be far more predictive of later school success, of literacy, of high school graduation, all the way down. They actually found, all the way into adult outcomes of like how much money you make as an adult. You can track back to this executive functioning as a kid. And executive function comes from care. It doesn't come from like this academics. So that's the schism, is that we used to think like care was one thing. That's just like this, feed the kids, make sure that they, are clean and like safe, right? And then education is the thing where you are like providing them
Formal,
with the
serious
knowledge.
at that point,
Exactly.
right? Okay.
It's more serious, or it's high-minded. And so it turns out that that is actually a complete false dichotomy. You cannot separate out care and education.
It doesn't.
And actually, if you choose one of the two, you choose care over the two.
Right, because it doesn't add up, right? There's like they're developing their emotional management at that early age, right? And so if a kid isn't in a good caring environment and is suffering traumatic experiences of neglect or whatever, for whatever reason, because the parents are stressed because somebody lost
Right.
their job and they can't do it all, and they're just kind of avoiding and just ignoring, I think there's psychological impacts that last, that get mapped into, that leaves this person into their adulthood having to address them, or in most cases go unaddressed, right? Because people just don't like trying to fix themselves at that level, right? So to me, it sounds like if the science is there and and we're looking for more equitable society outcomes and all of that, why aren't we doubling down at this early stage where there's just a huge 5-year gap? Like, I don't get it. Like, what's holding us up there? And then why are we having this debate with like care and academics? It seems like you're not going to get much academics if there's not care.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the stress thing. I mean, that's absolutely true. Well, there's this truism again from the nurse that says the body remembers, because part used to be like, okay, our 2-year-olds, they actually don't remember in long-term memory. Like, you and I can't remember what happened when we were 2, but the body remembers. And when you're stressed, that's another piece of it. When your stress system is like constantly active, because either you're in sort of an uncertain environment because you're not sure whether your needs are going to be met. Sometimes they will, or because there's this other, it's the idea that basically our stress systems were built to run away from a bear. And Nadine Burke-Harris, who's now the Surgeon General of California, but she's one of the pioneers on understanding this, effects of early childhood experience, say like, we're not built for when the bear comes home every night. And with these, if you have an alcoholic father, let's say, right, who's coming home and neglecting you, right, like our systems, our bodies and brains are literally not wired for that. And so it kind of goes a little bit nuts, because they like stay active all the time and like in threat mode. And then that has also, it's the psychological effects, also it's physiological effects. So you can track back risks of heart disease and high blood pressure, all sorts of other chronic health issues, all back to early childhood as well. The answer to your question, like, okay, so like, this is so obvious, why aren't we tackling it? I mean, a lot of it really comes down to like, American society is not happy still with the idea of like working mothers. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. Like, there is a There's a survey back done by Pew
What?
in 2013 that said
Mm.
half of Americans thought that young children were better off if their mother was at home. And only like 9% said that was the case if their father was at home, right? And so those, and particularly those among the older generations, obviously, as you see sort of among millennial Gen Z, there's more of a sense of equity. But I think there's still this sense that if the best thing you perceive the best thing is for the mother to be home with the children when they're young, then actually you wouldn't want to build a publicly funded childcare system because that would create an incentive for them not to do that. Now, my case is always what we need to be doing is honoring the choices and preferences of the parents. So it should be a case where if parents want to stay home, father or mother, they're able to. Like I support, strong paid family leave policies. I support, sort of stipends for stay-at-home parents, all those things. But you can do that in a way of saying, like, many parents, particularly women, will choose that they want to work outside the home, and we want to have a society, if we have any sense of having equity, that enables that. So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is politics. Honestly, there is not a particularly strong sort of like childcare lobby, so to speak, right? Like you saw this. Actually, it's an interesting illustration of what's happening with the school reopenings. The teachers, teachers have strong unions, right? And they're organized. They're middle class sort of wages. Like they have salaries. They have pensions. They have all these things, and they're able to basically say on some level, like, we need this following to be true before we're going to go back and teach. And if that's not true, like, there's ultimately like a threat of a strike there, like, which we're seeing in a few, I think Detroit I saw recently, or considering that. Childcare workers are not unionized, and they're very low wage workers. They're in many cases hourly, at will employees, right? They're in many states they're not even legally allowed to unionize, and so that's just an example of when, like, they can't exert that kind of power. So the field is pretty weak politically. But then again, parents, right? Like, it's this thing where right now there's not a huge amount of organization among the parents of young children, for a variety of reasons. I mean, part of it is that, as you say, like, when you're waking up five times a night with the baby, you're probably not super motivated to then go call your lobby your state legislature, participate in a rally. And then, and also there's a shorter time window. I mean, certainly, like, by the time your kids hit kindergarten, many people sort of like they moved on to worrying about K-12 issues. Exactly. Which is different than K-12, where you've got parents who are engaged for 12 or 13 years, right? Like, if you've got a middle school or a high school, you have a lot more capacity to do that. So there are a couple of factors there. And I will say one positive is there's been much more attention paid to it over the recent years. I mean, you've even seen this, in the past couple of weeks, because, as we'll get there, I'm sure, like, the pandemic has just put an enormous amount of extra pressure on an already fragile system, and it's starting to break. But, it's going to take a popular movement to force this to change, because it doesn't have to be this way. Many other nations, Canada, most of the European Union, have much more publicly funded system. No one has like a fully 100% it's free from whatever you want it type of system, but there are, in a place like Denmark, right, you're paying maybe a max of $250 a month, for high quality childcare, right? You've got generous paid family leave. You've got a child allowance, which is, something I've written about recently too, where the government is literally sending you money every month to, for each of your kids, because it's expensive to raise kids and society needs kids. So it's this sort of whole individualistic sense of, like, the American, like, our parents are going to go it alone, which really doesn't work in the modern economy. I don't know if it ever worked, but it certainly doesn't work in the modern economy.
Well, I don't know, given how many kind of like cantankerous, damaged adults are walking around in this world, if you check your news or you check your social media, maybe we kind of realized that the old system of just kind of letting everyone figure it out on their own is not like the best way to raise like future Americans, right? Like, can we treat this like optimizing human beings? Like, can we figure out us even just given how, like, it just seems like it's so fragmented and disparate and totally just related to what you can afford, right?
Yep.
And that the differences are so significant that I've heard parents that have had kids at the daycares that we've had, that they suddenly become disillusioned or disappointed in the kindergarten once they go to their public school kindergarten, because, well, it makes sense because the teachers now have to bring up a bunch of kids that haven't had a consistent whatever. Like, okay, stay-at-home parent, shouldn't there be a program to help a parent learn the essentials of like childcare? Like, I don't understand it. Like, I think if we want to make better citizens in the future, if we want to make people that are calm and not freaking out about whatever difficulties they encounter, their ability to control their own emotions. I mean, this sounds like this is an essential area to do it in, right? I mean, I'm constantly reminded, don't yell at the kids. Don't, they're exploring, they're doing things. They're not going to follow your rules. They're going to do what they're doing. And the job of a parent is to be sort of kind of like consistent, kind of boring and kind of calming and kind of read some books and like try to meet them. That's hard enough, right?
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, if we actually, as a society, put into place policies that supported families the way that our rhetoric says that families are important, right? Because that's, families, the most important thing. It's a bedrock corner of society, right? So it's nothing more important than families, families. But then we kind of leave them out on an island. And you're right, like it's everything. It's everything from, I mean, this is past the scope of our conversation, but I would just say, like, even things like affordable housing goes into this, right? Like housing instability, talk about stress, right? If you're getting evicted, if you're, a family that has a 2 or 3 year old, you think that doesn't have like a massive effect on that kid if they're moving around all the time, if their parents are stressed out or they're going to sleep at night. Like all of these policies that if we just wrapped the kids and the families, in their first couple of years of life and said, we're going to make sure that you have everything that you need to thrive. I mean, what that would do for every later social issue that we care about, and the amount of, I mean, you get down to dollars and cents, the amount of money we would save later on, and immediately too, because that's another piece of it, is like we're actually losing a significant portion of the workforce because we don't have an effective childcare system, would be enormous. But we don't. We sort of pay it lip service, and then we go and we put our money elsewhere.
Yeah, it seems like that seems to be, if that option exists, to pay lip service and then kind of shove the money somewhere in a different direction, that seems to be the easier approach to solving social ills. Like, but I think if you're waiting to solve problems that, Black Lives Matter movement, if you're waiting when everybody's an adult, grown up, and have basically been mapped out how they are, how they interact, the educate, whatever, that if you're waiting down the line, that's more expensive to try to sort out, right? More difficult than if you can at least get some consistent start to life for everybody. I mean, can't we just have like, I don't know, just a weekly check-in with the childcare expert? If you're stay at home, a half hour, like how's your kid doing? How are you doing? Like, what are some new techniques? Just coming up with, like, through the pandemic, the hardest thing was just coming up with like activities, and we ended up defaulting to like, okay, PBS Kids for the next several hours because we couldn't do it. Like, it's so hard, and I sound like maybe I'm just complaining, but I'm just, again, I'm going back to like, I could schedule my time with my wife and figure those things out. I know other parents can't. So what happens to them, right? What happens to their kids? And you're right, with the evictions, that's a whole other traumatic, tragic situation that's happening now. So, okay. So we understand that the system's been set up rather fragmented and very not well planned here for these early childhoods. So the hammer of COVID-19 comes down on everybody. What's happening now?
Yeah, so the problem here is that because of how it's set up, you basically have these childcare programs that are reliant on parent fees, not actually unlike a restaurant, right? They need paying customers. But with COVID, two things happen. One is all of them closed at the beginning, right? And even when they've started to come back over the summer, there are group size restrictions. And if normally you used to be able to have 20, 3-year-olds and two teachers in a classroom, now you can only have 10 or 12. Well, when you're having the size of these groups, and again, most of these programs were already barely making ends meet before the pandemic, right? We were working on margins of 1% or less in a lot of places. It just breaks the
1%.
finances in two. Yeah, because again, you can lower your expenses as much as you can, but at some point you have a certain number of fixed expenses.
You're limited
right?
to how many kids you can have in the room per teacher by
Exactly.
law, right?
So on average, we're seeing a lot of programs are at about half enrollment, and it is just breaking their financial backs because they can't sustain it. They're losing, 10, 20, $30,000 a month with these small programs. And so, surveys are showing that basically by the year's end, we could lose between a third and a half of the entire nation's childcare supply permanently. And these are like real numbers. We're already seeing it. It was something like
Wait,
200
say that again. A
by
third
a third to a half of programs are not going to
to
be
a
able to
half are going to go broke.
going to go broke by December if we don't have some kind of extra money coming in from the federal government. And it's already happening. There were I saw something recently. 200 of Pennsylvania's licensed childcare programs have closed permanently. I think it's 800 of California's. I mean, we're starting to already see these programs that are just saying, I cannot do it. I cannot make rent or pay a mortgage or pay my electricity bill because I just don't have the money coming in. Congress passed $3.5 billion for childcare nationally in the CARES Act, which is not nearly enough. That's actually Delta Airlines got more money than the entire childcare industry. And then in the current round of relief negotiations, the House has passed $50 billion, which would actually keep the sector afloat for about 6 months. The Senate GOP is proposing $15 billion, but as you know, the negotiations are stalled, and so until something happens, we're just every week we're losing. Every time payroll has to be made, every time rent has to be paid, we're losing more and more programs, and they're not coming back. And you mentioned the Black Lives Matters thing. I mean, I think we'd be remiss not to say the majority of these programs are led by, a disproportionate number are led by women of color. About 40% of the entire childcare field are women of color. And many of these family childcare homes are women-owned businesses, and so we're just, it is just tragic. We're seeing these programs close, and again, all of this is a choice. Like, it does not have to be this way.
How do you, man, and this is year's end type of stuff. Like, if we have to go further with it, I mean, that just sounds like more pain could be coming down the pike. And it's not through like pain because of mismanagement or whatever. It's just the nature of the business. If you're running an operation that's got, single digit profit margin, you have no room for mistakes.
Right.
I mean, there's just no, like, what is that, right? Like the restaurant industry is what, 10% is a good restaurant profit margin, right? And how much pain they're going through right now.
Yep.
But this is like, you could make a case, I guess, for people that work in that industry, that they're out of work. That's terrible. But you could say that the restaurant industry is sort of an elective activity, right?
Right.
I mean, in the sense, you could hear people making those arguments left and right. No disrespect for people working in the service industry that listen to my show, but we're talking about childhood early development. If a child center in middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania closes, then the families that have those kids there are now going to have to make some really big choices. Like, they may have to pull one of their parents out if they can even afford to do that. Right. If people are living checks to check already because they're on a lower income bracket and they can't afford to pay the rent without having a two-person income, that's once again, if they're lucky, never mind single parents, right? Like, it's just like, it gets ugly. I think if you start working out the possibilities of how people are getting jammed up,
It does. And it hampers the economic recovery too. Like on a pure, again, if you sort of even go past the effect on children and families, and you just want to take a purely utilitarian view of it, right? Like the childcare is infrastructure, and it is the ability. We know that it gets to your point. Like if that parent is coming out of the workforce to deal with the childcare breakdown, that is a worker that is not at some company that is necessarily going to be able to replace them. And so we see huge, there are estimates out there that the childcare crisis, again, pre-pandemic, was already costing businesses nationally, I think it's something like $10-15 billion in lost productivity and retention and recruitment costs and all of that. And this is already taking predominantly women out of the workforce. There was a Census Bureau report that came out just last week that showed among millennial mothers who are not currently in the workforce, 1/3 of them aren't in the workforce because of childcare issues. That includes school, but this was over the summer, so there wasn't a school problem.
Do you know how many like executive directors I've had on the show of trade groups that have big workforce issues? Like they can't find enough people to join their industry, and they're struggling to. That was pre-COVID. So now we add the problem. Their problems are being compounded at this point, right? Collectively. So this sounds like this is not good. Like what's Congress waiting for? I don't know. You and I are not gonna be able to figure that out. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Like, I have had this other conversation with certain organizations. They have reserves, and I've started to notice they don't necessarily talk about it, but they're not actually dipping too far. They're dipping into some, but they're not dipping that far. And that's another strongly held opinion of mine. It's like, what greater catastrophe can you imagine that you might need to hold on to those reserves? It would require like an asteroid falling out of the universe.
Like look outside. If it's a rainy day, look outside. It's raining.
It's happening right now. This is why you don't fire people. Don't let go of people. Dip into those reserves. Call the year wash. Most of the nonprofits have to have substantial reserves. At least the well-established ones. Those reserves should be depleted by next year. And if they're not, it's going to come out in their 990s. It's going to be publicly shown. And I wonder if there's going to be a backlash for not investing in protecting the employees that they're just trying to do their job, right? And then just I wonder if that's going to happen. It's certainly this to me, everything you just laid out kind of is terrifying. I'll be honest with you, Elliot. I thought maybe there'd be like a new way out, or we can there'll be some hard lessons and we'll learn from this. But what do you think? And I try, because my mother always tells me, remember, every crisis, you look for the silver lining. There's always something positive that comes out of everything. But what do you see might be positive aspects that come out of this
I think that to me, the positive thing here is that everyone suddenly realizes this is a problem and knows we need to fix it. So
for guys like you, it's like, finally, welcome, welcome, thank you.
Yes, exactly. Well, especially the women who've been working on this for decades. They're like, oh, nice to know this. We've been and so I think there is an opportunity now to rethink. And you can look at, again, this is actually one of the very, very few bipartisan issues that remain, right? You do have both parties saying, yes, this is a problem. Yes, we need to do something about it. And so what I think is really a chance to rethink, like, how do we fund and how do we treat childcare in this country? So, this is the time now to have the conversations about, is childcare actually a public good? And if it's a public good, that means we need to be funding it at a much, much, much higher rate than we are right now. What is a proper amount of money that should we expect parents to pay anything? Like, my personal view is it should be free. Like, fifth grade is free. Like the 3-year-old year should be free, because there's no different reason why, we have those things in reality. Other people argue we should cap it at, either one number you hear a lot is 7% of sort of your income, and maybe free if you're under a certain, you make under a certain amount.
Kind of ratioed.
A ratio. Some places, so they'll argue you cap it at just an amount, like sort of almost like just to make sure parents have skin in the game type of thing. I don't particularly buy that argument, but they'll be like, it should be, max out at $10 a day.
Skin in the game. We literally have some skin in the
game.
I know.
That's a good point. I like that. I'll use that. Yeah, they literally have skin that we have. Yes. So that's, but whatever it is, like this idea of like we need to set a new vision for childcare, like I think there's more reception to that than there's been in a long time, because it's going to be expensive. Like the fact is, like, to truly do this right, you're probably talking nationally $300 to $400 billion a year. Now, that number sounds really high until you remember for K-12 education, we pay about $700 billion a year. Nationally, Medicare, Medicaid's around $400, $500 billion. Like, again, these things are they're sort of critical social programs. That's not actually an insane price tag, particularly when you add in the benefits, because the one thing that childcare also gets you, you mentioned the executives who talked about the workforce issues. It's every place in the US and internationally that has instituted some form of free or nearly free childcare for some number of years. So that could be pre-K for 4-year-olds, that could be, subsidized childcare for toddlers. We've seen an almost instantaneous rise in maternal employment, which is interesting, right? And fairly significant, usually averaging around 10% increase in labor force participation among mothers. And that's, it can, to the point that Quebec, their
Profitability right there.
Exactly. The Quebec program actually seems to, by some estimates, is either cost neutral, actually makes the money for the province. Other estimates say it's, at least significantly curbs the cost of it. So that's sort of an interesting thing, is like, I can argue, because that's personally my way of, I like to talk about it, is like the benefits to the children and the families and what we're going to get as a society. But again, I know in a lot of cases, politicians, business leaders are responding to sort of more immediate incentives, and the short-term ROI, because of the increase in maternal employment, is just remarkable. And there's almost no other program, no other kind of lever you can pull that gets you that many new workers all of a sudden. Because it turns out, again, there are many women who would like to be in the workforce who are not currently, because of what you said. Like,
financially
financially doesn't make sense. Like, why would I do that? Why would I go to work when 90% of my salary or more is going to go to pay for childcare? So we set up this very sort of irrational system.
How do we attach like healthcare costs? I mean, like, mental health is a big problem. It's not like that problem's gotten better. It just keeps progressively getting worse. That has to have some numbers of costs for, our workforce situation. Like, are there, I presume there are people studying this issue to try to attach what that's like if we can even just reduce a certain percentage of, emotional issues that occur early 20s or something. I don't know. Could there be like this boost in productivity?
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, there are an estimate certainly of like child poverty on its like broadly is estimated to cost the US somewhere between 800 billion and like 1.1 trillion a year.
Say that, wait a minute, childhood poverty?
Child poverty, yeah, is estimated, I mean, basically to between 800 billion and 1.1 trillion, primarily from reduced productivity, reduced, people in the workforce, right, increased crime. I mean, all of these things that are correlated.
Right there. So 300 billion to reduce $1 trillion it costs.
Yeah. And that's just right. So there's really no way you can cut it that is not going to be worth it. And it is, to say, and that's before you get to any of the moral arguments, any of the philosophical arguments. That's on pure dollars and cents. But again, because it feels like a lot of money for a relatively small constituency, I think that's part of, again, we come back to the sort of politics of it. So one thing that I think is also, you assess with silver linings, I think there's an opportunity for parents to organize much more into a block of sort of voting power and then political power. And you have parents who are business owners as well. That's the thing, we have many, and this is actually, I think, where dads need to step up, because we've been letting the moms kind of deal with this for way too long without some help. And so, if you think about how many fathers are also business owners, you can hit it both, right? You can be like, A, I'm a father and a voter. B, I'm a business owner and a contributor, and then some taxpayer, and you kind of a chamber member, all of those things. So that's the thing too, is there is a chance to change this, but it requires all of us using all of our different sort of sources of small p power to you really sort of push the issue and not let politicians get away with it, because that's part of it. It comes down to this, Ernesto. If you're a governor or a state senator or a congressperson or even a president, and you don't do much for childcare, there's no blowback. No one's coming after you. It's not like if you raise taxes on business or if you didn't, pass
Because
school
everybody
funding.
dealing with the problem is too busy dealing with the problem.
Exactly.
Right. It's not like the pain isn't there. Right. What?
And some of it, I just think we need organizing avenues for that. But yeah, so that's, and the taxing is interesting too, right? Like, I always wonder, like, if this is such a productivity issue for businesses, like, instead of fighting for corporate tax cuts, if I was a business owner, what I would do is I would say, actually, I want a corporate tax increase that is specifically dedicated to providing, widely accessible, high quality childcare, because it's good for me now in terms of my employer, the ability to recruit and retain employees. It's good for me later because I'm going to have a stronger workforce. There's a guy named Mike Petters, who's the CEO of Huntington Ingalls, down in Newport News. They're the largest military shipbuilder in the U.S. And he actually often will say publicly, like, early childhood care and education is a national security issue, because in terms of the workforce, both to like build the stuff, but also like the number of kids who are qualifying to join the armed forces. Like, so you can literally take a national security lens to childcare. So it doesn't matter which way you cut it or what sort of. Because I'm saying is, it doesn't have to just be you care about this because you should care about this as a gender issue. You should care about this as a child development issue. But even if you're like someone who, takes a different
defense
view,
only,
a
that's
defense
the most
only view,
important
you can
thing.
make an
Well,
argument.
guess
Yeah,
what?
exactly.
Yeah, well, I think it's I don't know. I heard a quote from a Joe Rogan. He said, "Can we just figure out ways to design like our society so it produces less losers," in a sense, right? Is his argument, his crass argument. But I mean, his point was, what is going on that we're not investing in the early stages of human development? These are our future Americans that will be taking care of you and I when we get older. Probably want them to be well-adjusted, healthy. You want to make sure that some basics are sort of handled for everybody. And it doesn't seem like that's what we're doing, and certainly not right now. That's like, this is terrifying. So hopefully the shock of all of this will be significant, and there'll be some politicians that'll see the errors of their ways and come to consensus on some level, because I think just even having this indecision of just supplying help in this incredibly unprecedented time, that in and of itself should be just a fireable offense. Like, that should just be, that's the end. Like, why are you there then? That's, but anyway, we could go on with that. Elliot, thank you so much. I was really interested in talking to you, and I think we should plug your book one more time. That seems like it's really clearly written on the problem scope that you focus on. So it's Crawling Behind America's Childcare Crisis and How to Fix It. So I love a book that gives you the problem and then gives you some of the solutions we should be pushing towards.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you for having me on, and thanks for all you do.
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. Hang tight, and thank you guys for listening. All right. I don't know what to say to my audience sometimes, but if you got kids, hang in there. I'm with you. I get it. It's you're doing a superhuman job right now. So take care, everybody.
For more episodes of Through the Noise, go to throughthenoise.us.